The midnight sun had been gone for weeks, but its ghost still clung to the ice in bruised shades of pewter and bone. Out here on the rim of the Beaufort, twilight sagged like a cigarette burned across the horizon, refusing to die all the way through. Perfect hour for dirty secrets to surface, perfect hour for me. Names Arkady, Icebreaker, Ursus, private nose for hire. 6'5" at the shoulder. 1,200 pounds of fur and regret. You could say the world didn't ask for a polar bear gumshoe. The world also didn't ask for slicks of crude lapping at newborn flows. We all get things we never ordered. The case started with a smell, always does. People figure bears are all brawn and no brains. But the real power's in the schnoz. I've tracked seal pups under 4 feet of drift by the tang of their mother's milk on the air. I found poachers' camps from 20 clicks upwind, following the metal sting of spent brass. So when I caught a ribbon of something oily curling off the surf that night, bitter as burnt coffee, slick as lies, I knew trouble was dripping in on the tide. I padded down the scree slope to the waterline, claws ticking like metronomes on shale. The sea lay flat as an unwritten confession, but its skin glittered wrong, a faint rainbow sheen. Beautiful the way broken glass is beautiful before it cuts you. I dipped a paw, rubbed 2 toes together. Slick. All right, fresh. 2. Not yet chewed into chocolate mousse by wave chop. The law said tankers weren't supposed to rinse their sins this close to the continental shelf. But the law out here was a polite suggestion stapled to a gale. Somebody in a rust bucket hull had dumped and figured no one would notice. Nobody. Maybe, except a detective who couldn't sleep through the stench of guilt on the wind. I followed the current north along the heel of a point locals called Jawbreaker Spit, sharp, narrow, ready to bite. Every 50 yards the rainbow darkened, the crude thickening into viscous veins that sucked the heat from my paw pads. Not that I had much heat to spare. Last winter's ice had blown out 2 months early. The pack still hadn't grown back. I'd burned fat reserves by June, scrounging kelp raiding eiders and stale fox carcasses, telling myself next year would be easier. Next year was shaping up to be an IOU scribbled on melting permafrost. But I kept walking. Half a mile in, I smelled something else riding shotgun on the crude diesel engine oil, a backbeat of burned polymer, shipyard perfume. I hunched and listened. Nothing but the faint slap of a swell against rotting floe edges. Then, there, a single throb. Distant and low, like a heart skipping outside a rib cage, diesels idling, masked under the hum of a coolant pump. I left the beach for the sea ice, what little of it existed, shouldering through molting snow like a bruiser parts a bar crowd. The ice groaned but held. Out past the first pressure ridge I saw her, Pan-Arctica star. Letters ghost lit along a hull the color of old debt. Registered in Nassau, flagged in convenience. 38,000 tons of motor squeezed dinosaurs, riding low in the water. And she was bleeding. Twin pipes high on her starboard bow dribbled a tar black thread that vanished under the surface. The crew had rigged a canvas sleeve to funnel runoff below the waterline. Clever if you're hiding waste from satellites. Sloppy if a bear with a nose for malfeasance is skulking your wake. I settled behind a slab of ice and watched. Bridge lights glowed dull amber. Nobody on deck except a bored deckhand smoking contraband and flicking ash into the slick like seasoning. My claws itched. Could have ambled right up the hawsepipe. Dragged him down for a chat. But questions asked that way get one answer, panic, and panic makes people hole up behind lawyers. Better to tail the star inland. Sniff up the supply chain. And choke it where the paper met the ink. Pollution's a hydra. Cut 1 hose and 3 more leak in its place. I needed the head that signed the order. The tanker steamed east, hugging the line where young ice fractured into pancakes. I tracked her from the shadow side, swimming when flows failed, belly to the water, ears just above the chop like a polar white crocodile. Jazz from the ship's galley drifted over the waves, muted trumpet, brushed snare, a lonely sax riff bending notes cold enough to frost brass. They were piping in nightlife to mask the fact they were murdering it. A Private Eye's soundtrack if ever I heard one. I filed it in the irony drawer. Near dawn, the star hove to outside Greycap Inlet, an uncharted cove where cliffs leaned close like guilty shoulders. Anchor chains rattled. By the time her props spun down, orange booms unrolled off port and starboard. Floating barriers meant to scream, "See, We care, to any drone patrol that might wander by at sunrise. Half a show. The spill sucked under the booms. Invisible in the pre-dawn gray. The crew launched a skiff. 2 men in company parkas ferried plastic drums ashore, stacking them behind tailors. Probably bilge slops bound for some unregulated burn pit. I crawled onto a nearby rock shelf, close enough to smell sweat through their diesel cologne. One, tall, reek of cheap vodka sweating out his pores, grumbled in Russian. Another hour we're clear. Tell the captain the coast is a graveyard. His partner laughed like someone shaking nails in a tin. I marked his face, his smell, the number tattooed on the back of his neck. Then I melted into shadows, heading inland where a ridge silhouetted a small research outpost, weather antennas against bruised sky. An empty mess hall, a sat uplink dead this season for budget cuts. Neutral ground, the kind of joint nobody visits unless a storm's chewing off roof panels. Perfect place to lay low, raid a cold storage fish locker, and phone a friend. That friend was Tova, an Arctic fox with 2 reputations. Fastest scrounger on the north coast and the only hacker who could run circles around corporate firewall drones using nothing but repurposed weather balloons and a laptop cooled by permafrost. I found her curled in a crate of freeze-dried pemmican behind the comms hut. White tail over her nose. She cracked an eyelid. You smell like an Exxon Valdez nightmare. Compliment accepted. I said, need a trace on Pan-Arctica star. And coffee. Coffee died with the last resupply. She yawned. I've got algae tea and 2 Ah batteries for flavor. We brewed the sludge over a propane camp burner. Jazz still floated faint from the roadstead. Distant but defiant. I nodded at the horizon. That bucket's been laundering bilge into the sea. Need bill of lading. Ownership shell. Who signs the paychecks? Tova's whiskers twitched. You paying? Truth and a favor. Liar, she said, but fired the laptop anyway. Minutes later, strings of code scrolled like ants on parade. Stars operated by Northern Deep, subsidiary of Arctic Maritime Logistics, which is really Valor Pacific Holdings out of Singapore. Board chair. Marcus H. Pender. I blew steam off the T. Shipping magnate with a yacht the size of Denial? Same. And get this. Valor Pacific just won a hush-hush contract to assist regional spill response. She spun the screen. They profit from the cleanup they create. I bared fang. Not a smile. Time to rattle Pender's liquor cabinet. The plan wrote itself. Follow the paper trail to the next bunker port. Snag cargo manifests. Leak them to regulators who still remembered their spines. Maybe add a little one bear sabotage garnish for flavor. But Noir tails chew plans like puppies chew shoes. Before dawn cracked, satellite chatter lit Tova's console. Pan-Arctica star was underway again. But not out of the inlet. She'd beached on a hidden sandbar and was pumping ballast with fire hoses, churning sludge into the cove to lighten draft. Fast and dirty. By the time we scrambled outside, crude already ringed the shoreline like a funeral necklace. A dozen bears from the earlier crowd had followed the scent here. They padded through black syrup, tongues lapping reflexively at what their instincts misread as the thick fat of a corpse. One cub staggered, gagged, oil dribbling from his muzzle. Jazz still spilled from the ship's open portholes, bright, brassy, grotesque. I stood on the rock, claws curling, and considered old rules. Never charge a steel hull. Never fight battles bigger than your teeth. I looked at the cub, wheezing. The rules tasted like sawdust. Motion comic freeze frame. Me reared to full height. Oil sheen moon mirrored in my eyes. Cut to black and white panel. Spotlight on claws raking hull plates. Saxophone screams. Cymbals hiss. In the glare of floodlights, deckhands froze as 6 inches of zircon hard keratin screeched across paint, leaving trenches weeping diesel. They loaded flares from a flare gun, beanbags compared to my hide, and fired. Scarlet sparks bounced off fur as I roared a chord low enough to quake rivets. Another panel. A bear silhouette framed by hololights. Claws hooked like twin switchblades. Reality kicked back harder. A security contractor leaned over the rail with a shotgun, beanbag rounds. But he was racked tight as a drum. I lunged, slammed both paws into the steel below his perch. Vibrations shot up the ladder, jarred the weapon from his grip. It clattered to deck, discharging harmlessly into the sky. He stumbled back into darkness. Below, diesel pumps still hummed. I tore at the hose coupling. Jaws finding reinforced rubber. One twist, a yank, and the pipe vomited slick across the deck, spraying humans instead of sea. Shouts, curses, footfalls skidding on oil. In panicked chorus they killed the pumps. Closed valves. The music died mid-sax riff. Needle off vinyl. Sirens whined, Coast Guard. Auto pinged by pressure drop sensors Tova had spoofed minutes earlier. Floodlights snapped off as the crew doused generators, hoping darkness could unwrite the last 10 minutes. Too late. The detective had scratched his calling card deep into the hull, the drones overhead. The data spikes in the Coast Guard feed. The oil-slicked Cub coughing crimson foam. The evidence ledger overflowed. I backed down the anchor chain and plunged into black water. Oil sloughing from my coat like dirty snowmelt. I swam for the inlet mouth where Tova's infrared beacon winked. Behind me, blue strobes of enforcement cutters knifed the gloom. Horns bellowing. The tanker's crime scene was sealed. Not justice, just the first act of it, but enough for one night. Tova watched me haul onto the floe. Breath steaming like a locomotive. "You look like Jackson Pollock painting a nightmare," she said. I shook. Spattering black rain. "Tell me we got it all." Video. Audio. Ballast pump logs. Ice spoof timeline. Sent to 5 regulators and 3 reporters who still answer email. The Cub onshore whimpered. I lumbered over. Nudged him upright. He'd live if the crude hadn't fried his lungs. We guided him to clean snow. Watched him chew poffles, washing poison from his palate. His mother whuffed low gratitude. Morning peeled back the horizon in lavender sheets. The tanker loomed silent under armed escort. Tova sipped algae tea, passed me the mug. "Pender's lawyers will bury this," she said. I drank. The cup tasted like kelp, hope, and bitterness. "Then we dig it up again." Winston Wolfe said it. "Cleanup is my specialty." Who? Old film. I grinned. Jazz crooned faint in my memory. But I'd replaced the soundtrack now with something sharper, ice splitting under spring thaw. A sound that promises breakup, release, change, no matter how long winter lingered. We walked east, paw and paw-size print in fresh snow. Shadows stretching tall as mastheads behind us. Case closed? Not hardly. But in Noir, closure's just a door you slam on one nightmare so the next can walk through. And a detective's got to keep moving. Fresh tracks cover their own sins. The horizon glimmered, pink gold on broken ice. Somewhere out there, men in tailored suits were already planning the next spill, the next cover-up, the next jazz track to drown out nature's objections. Good, let them plan. The nose knows, and the nose never sleeps long. I flexed claws, tasted the cold. Another case already scented the wind. And the detective in white would be there, ready to write it in black and oil. Snow hissed beneath my pads as Tova and I pushed south along the fractured fringe of the Beaufort. A slow motion crawl through broken mirror tiles that used to be pack ice. The Coast Guard cutters behind us blared all night like brass sections warming up for a funeral, herding the Pan-Arctica star deeper into bureaucratic limbo. By dawn the tanker's running lights were nothing but sickly embers on the horizon, and the water between us smelled less like diesel, more like the cold iron of a new case stretching its limbs. Tova's satellite phone squawked the minute we crossed back onto packed snow. The screen lit up with a name I knew too well, Natalie Kincaid. Freelance journalist, Pulitzer scars on both shoulders, throat full of broken glass vowels that made lies bleed out in terror. She once embedded with walrus hunters during the gutter year, filed copy so raw most syndicates spiked it. When the world needs the kind of truth that ruins dinner. Natalie is the bartender pouring doubles. She skipped hello. "You just kneecapped a shipping conglomerate." Arkady. Her voice echoed across the tundra through the phone's tinny speaker. I lowered my head to cut the wind. Just warmed him up. The kneecap comes when regulators write indictments in ink that doesn't wash off. Valor Pacific hired a crisis PR war room before sunrise. They're peddling technical malfunction to every outlet with bandwidth. They'll spin until the gearbox strips. I said, "Can you jam a wrench?" "Possibly." She breathed. "Then, meet me in Fairbanks." Fairbanks is 800 clicks and 3,000 calories away. Grab a ride. There's a covert cargo hop from Point Barrow tonight. Bring the fox. Tova's ears perked. The fox has a name. She barked into the mic. Natalie laughed, harsh, clipped, music to my frostbit ears. Sorry, Tova. Valor Pacific runs its main data vault out of Fairbanks. Inside the old Trans-Arctic pipeline hub. I've got an inside badge and 12 hours before they rotate tokens. We need whatever's on those servers before it's shredded. I pictured corporate hallways drenched in fluorescent hum. Men in shirts starched with plausible deniability. My claws twitched. We'll be there. The Point Barrow hop was a wheezy DC-3 fitted with Arctic skis and a cockpit crew right out of a Chekhov novella. Two cousins who believed in vodka and aviation in equal measure. They bolted a cargo net over the floor so my bulk wouldn't redecorate the fuselage during turbulence. Tova curled atop a crate of pipeline gaskets and hacked the in-flight Wi-Fi before we reached cruising altitude. Siphoning Valor Pacific's legal team's group chat. She cackled every few minutes, tail flicking like a metronome. Each laugh sounded like a nail hammered deeper into Pender's coffin. Fairbanks met us with a sodium orange halo glowing through falling ice crystals. Natalie was waiting inside an old military hangar. Trench coat cinched over thermal gear. Fedora pulled low like she'd stepped off a 1940s set. The motion comic vibe fit. Even the overhead fluorescence flickered noir strobe across her cheekbones. She briefed us while we suited up. The data vault lived 5 stories below the defunct pipeline headquarters, a bunker built when oil was still currency. Not contraband. Valor Pacific repurposed it into a jurisdictional air gap, shielding litigation hazard files from subpoenas by burying drives behind a maze of legacy iron doors and Cold War humidity alarms. What's our angle? I asked. Natalie tapped her tablet, thumbnail clicking. Night shift logs show a scheduled software patch at 0200. They'll open the vault, mount all arrays to run diagnostics. I convinced an analyst named Ryder to slip away for a smoke break and drop his all-clear fob outside North Bay loading dock. Tova checked her watch. That's in 40 minutes. I bared incisors in something vaguely akin to a grin. Plenty of time. The loading dock was a mouth of concrete and inert security cams. Ryder, nervous as a snowshoe hare, handed off his fob without meeting my gaze. One look at 1,200 pounds of monochrome justice will rearrange a man's priorities. Natalie pressed a wad of non-sequential bills into his hand, murmured ruins of gratitude, and he vanished back into the swirling ice like a secret he was desperate to forget. Inside, the building smelled of dust and stale printer toner. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, a jazz line of electrical anxiety. We padded down a freight corridor. Past pallets shrink-wrapped in pipeline valves now obsolete in an era when the pipe carried more lawsuits than crude. At the service elevator, Tova jacked a maintenance panel and cross-wired it to Ryder's fob. Gears groaned, doors parted, descending into Pender's throat. She whispered. The vault level exhaled conditioned air chilled to preserve drives. Natalie stepped lightly. Tova's claws clicked, mine thundered. We reached a steel iris door whose biometric scanner expected Ryder's retinal map. Natalie produced a ceramic lens doused in saline. An imprint Ryder made for us upstairs, slapped it over the sensor. A green diode winked. The iris dilated, revealing rows of server towers. LEDs blinking heartbeat rhythms. Somewhere inside those racks, shipping logs traced the illegal outflow. Bribes. The kill chain that kept tankers dumping sludge into the Arctic. Tova slid into a swivel chair, fingers dancing. Code spilled across monitors like snowfall turned technicolor. She whispered passphrases, spoofed timestamps, seeded Trojans, drives mounted with soft chimes. Gigabytes bled onto her solid-state decks. Natalie kept lookout, recorder rolling. I prowled aisles, nose parsing the ozone tang of spinning platters. The faint whiff of old paper archives behind a cage. One cabinet smelled different, fresh cardboard. Ink still off gassing. I sliced the lock. Inside, printed contracts between Valor Pacific and a shell corp named Boreal Response Initiative, the same, spill cleanup, outfit bidding for government subsidies. Signatures matched. Conflict of interest so large you could moor a tanker inside. Sudden clatter. Elevator chime. Voices. Patrol shift early. Tova yanked her drives. Hissed, 90 seconds. Natalie killed overheads. Plunged the vault into black studded only by equipment LEDs. We ducked behind server stacks as boots clacked down the central aisle. Flashlights tagging metallic aisles. A guard's beam swept inches above Tova's tail. He paused, sniffed stale air. My heart hammered slow, deliberate beats, each one whispering how easily I could silence both men. But dead guards create paperwork, frightened ones tell stories. I eased forward, squeezed my bulk beneath a pipe run. When the next beam swung past, I let out a low rumble, deep, subsonic, the language of shifting ice. Flashlights jerked, collided, dropped. One bulb shattered, plunging them into panic. I followed with a roar that could sand paint off steel. They bolted. Elevator doors slammed. Natalie threw breakers. Lights sputtered alive. Exit plan. Now. We raced service stairs, bypassed the locked roof hatch with claw torque. Fresh night wind greeted us, hauling spindrift like a jazz brush across cymbals. Below, security swarmed the lobby. Natalie keyed her sat pager, signaled to a hired bush pilot warming rotors on a pad 2 blocks east. We dashed across rooftop, leapt a gap to an adjacent warehouse. Tova rolled, landed, whooped. I hit like a refrigerator tossed from a 5th floor window. Cracked tar paper, kept moving. Alarms below blared, blending with city sirens like horns in a blues climax. By dawn we were airborne. Twin otter skimming cloud tops rosy with false sun. Tova duplicated the drive images to 3 encrypted balloons drifting toward open internet nodes. One copy to the Pacific Environmental Tribunal, another to Natalie's editor, a third to a server farm in Reykjavik where crowdsourced attorneys dissected corporate rot for sport. Even if Valor Pacific shredded every tape by noon, the story was already metastasizing. I dozed for an hour, dreamt of bowhead ribs arching over ice like gravestones. Woke to Natalie tapping my shoulder. Transmission confirmed. Initial leak trending. Pender's board has called emergency session. Outside the window, dawn painted the Yukon in pinks so fragile they felt like forgiveness. Tova reclined across seatbacks, tail flicking jazz rhythms, earbuds piping Coltrane through borrowed static. Natalie pulled a flask from her coat, offered it, smelled like rye and perseverance. I took a sip, throat warming slow. She asked, "What now, Icebreaker?" I gazed at the horizon where mountaintops knifed the sky, each peak a bar line in music only desperate beasts could read. Oilmen will lawyer, regulators will stutter, ice will keep melting, we'll keep sniffing. A beat, cases don't close. I added, they drift. She nodded. Recorder already live, capturing freeform testimony for the post-noir generation. Somewhere down there, cubs still licked poison from their fur. Tankers still charted shortcuts through thawed passages. Jazz still crackled from rusted hulls floating sins into an ocean fighting to stay cold. But files were in the wild. Secrets uncloaked. Valor had a new synonym. One spelled with teeth and code and midnight witnesses. The plane banked south, engines droning a minor seventh that resolved into the blue note of tomorrow. Behind us the Arctic unrolled empty and vast, yet suddenly louder than every horn section on Earth. The detective closed his eyes, nose memorizing the clean bite of stratosphere, ready for the next scent of wrong on the wind. The Twin Otter set us down on a wind-polished runway of blue ice outside Tuktoyaktuk. Skis hissing like wire brushes on a snare. The pilot gave a thumbs up through the plexi. Already checking new coordinates, he'd haul med supplies north on the hop back. A side gig that almost made the fuel math honest. Tova bounded out first, white tail flicking Morse code nobody alive could read except maybe the wind. Natalie shouldered her satchel of drives. Eyes raccoon ringed from 30 hours straight of recording. Leaking, stitching clips. I followed, claws clicking on aluminum, the cabin roof wearing fresh grooves where my back had braced during tight banking. The air outside was bitter enough to pickle breath before it left the mouth. Good, I thought. Truth lasts longer in a deep freeze. A military cargo truck idled beside a lone hangar. Stenciled letters half scraped away by sandblasts. Inside, heaters roared over pallet stacks of de-icing salt and expired MREs. A man in parkas the color of regret waved us deeper. He was EPA, but the last year had clipped that agency's authority so short he carried no badge. Just a laminated phone number for an underfunded field office back in Seattle. His name was Ridley. Maritime Crimes Task Force, voice hoarse from too many red-eyed testimonies no committee had showed up to hear. "You sure you want to do this in tuck?" he asked. Boots crunching on salt crystals. Fairbanks press conference took the teeth out of Valor Pacific. "They're reeling." "Reeling isn't drowning," Natalie said, dropping her satchel on a crate. Drives thudded like muted gongs. "We feed them the autopsy tonight, internal memos. Ballast dump spreadsheets. The whole necropsy." Ridley glanced at me, surprised at a bear in a human warehouse. Then pretended he saw cross-species whistleblowers every day. "Satellite window for live feed opens in 12. Text spotty. Upload fails. They'll spin sabotage." Tova unslung her field rig, 3 fiberglass rods. "Mylar sails. A kite rigged to ride the jet stream. We won't need your pipe broadband. Grandpa, this baby rides stratospheric winds to a Netra relay over Edmonton. From there, torrents flow like whiskey." We worked in silence. Natalie drafted a statement dripping battery acid. Ridley notarized chain of custody sheets with hands that shook just enough to rattle the pen. I paced, nose in wind gusts leaking through corrugated seams. Sampling every chemical quiver. Diesel, salt, a faint whisper of horizon snow. No pursuit scent yet, but Valor Pacific's security goons wouldn't stay passive. They'd seen the class action hashtags trending. Their stockline nosedive. Cornered corporations bite. Somewhere near sunset, the pale smear that passes for dusk this far north, Ridley's walkie crackled. A civilian helicopter had filed a flight plan from Prudhoe Bay to Tuck. Decks cleared for survey work. No insignia. Too fast to be news. Too late to be casual. We didn't need a crystal ball. Clock's bleeding, Natalie muttered, tapping her laptop impatiently as Tova's kite finally caught a thermal and clawed upward through purple sky. The spool whined, fiber optic thread unrolling toward the heavens. Packet LEDs blinked green. Data began to trickle, then surge. All the rot we'd stolen, bribes masked as disaster readiness grants. Carbon offset swaps priced to zero. The kill order for the Beaufort bilge purge. 6 terabytes of confession ascending on a kite string. Rotor thumps approached first as a tremor in my sternum. The chopper banked into view. Matte black fuselage. Skids skimming the ice. Searchlight probed the runway, then fixed on the hangar door, turning corrugated steel into a spotlight frame from some grisly stage. Ridley swore, stuffed notarized originals into a pelican case, snapped it shut. I stepped outside, letting the beam latch onto me like an angry god. Engines flared, wash whipping snow needles that stung my snout. Over the roar, a bullhorn. Return stolen property. Lie flat. Non-compliance will be met with force authorized under Arctic Maritime Security Act. Natalie appeared beside me, recorder blinking red. Statute doesn't exist, she yelled. Everything exists once someone rich enough declares it. I rumbled. The chopper skids kissed ice. Cargo door yawning. 4 silhouettes in tactical Gore-Tex strode forward. Rifles cradled but not yet raised. Valor Pacific patches, nobody in uniform but corporate mercs these days. I padded forward until the hottest muzzle click found my chest. The lead gunman's visor reflected a white monster dipped in oil and righteous contempt. I let my breath fog the polycarbonate. You're trespassing on EPA property, Ridley shouted, though his voice wavered like a bad radio signal. EPA lost jurisdiction. Gunman answered, when your budget dried up. Budget dries, but the law doesn't. Natalie barked back. He laughed. Law's a pipeline, shut the valve. Flow stops. That line struck like a slap. I flexed claws. Muscles coiling under fur. Could shred them, sure, but dead men feed only martyr spin. We needed them desperate, not deceased. Tova's voice crackled in our earpieces. Payload at 89%. 90. 93. I lowered onto all fours. Slow. Take your drives. I growled in my best gravel baritone. Gun barrels tracked me. They're decoys. Real files already airborne. Leader scoffed. Bluff. I gestured skyward with my muzzle. The kite glimmered against violet dusk. Tail blinking status LEDs like a constellation. His visor tilted. He barked an order. One merc pivoted. Raised rifle. Sighted on the polypropylene string. Tova screamed into comms. Not yet. Trigger squeeze. Rifle spat. The first round snapped fiber. Spark flare in thin air. Second slug clipped the kite's carbon spar. The frame cartwheeled, parachuting toward distant flats. My heart convulsed. Payload still uploading? Tova hammered keys. Voice frantic. Link degraded. Hold. Green LED on her console pulsed steady. She exhaled so hard her mic squealed. Data complete. We're mirrored 18 times. They just cut the scenic route. I bared teeth in something half smile, half snarl. Congratulations, I told the mercs. You shot down a weather balloon. Meanwhile, the confession letters your CEO wrote to his Cayman accountant are now trending on 12 continents. I took a deliberate step closer. And you're trespassing on federal soil with unlicensed firearms. Who's bluffing? Visor man's rifle drooped a fractional inch. The gunman to his left shifted weight. Doubt leaking through Kevlar. Helicopter blades still hammered overhead. But the beat felt uncertain now. Like a drummer who'd lost the chart in an improvised bridge. Natalie walked past me. Fedora yanked low. Lens pointed straight at their faces. Smile for the shareholders. Boys, you just became the cover image for our follow-up exposé. Mercenaries of a Melting Kingdom. Flash clicked. Floodlight washed everything in Noir bronze. Standoff lasted 10 seconds. Maybe an hour in pulse time. Rotor wash stung my eyes. But I didn't blink. Finally Visor Man raised a gloved hand. Signaled retreat. Guns holstered. They backed toward the chopper. Boots skidding on ice. Doors slammed. Engine throttled. They lifted. Banking west. A black silhouette shrinking into haze. Tova whooped. Fists pumping. Ridley let his knees sag. Relief washing the fear from his posture. Natalie kept filming until rotor thumps faded into the hush. Night sealed the moment. Above, aurora filaments teased the dark. Pale jazz lines scribbled across a virgin score. I watched. Inhaled air now clean of diesel specters. Justice? Not exactly. But a body blow to men who thought the Arctic a blank page for profit signatures. We packed gear. Loaded the Pelican into Ridley's truck. He'd get it to chain of custody deep freeze in Anchorage by morning. Natalie's flights would route her to D.C. Testimony booked in front of whatever committee still remembered how to subpoena. Tova had a hacker conference in Helsinki. Keynote on Arctic data as climate resistance. Me? I had open ice. New tracks to nose. A horizon humming faint with the wrongs yet to surface. Natalie touched my foreleg before climbing into the cab. No headlines say your name. Arkady. Noir rule. The detective works in silhouette. I shrugged. Let the ocean say it when she's clean again. She smiled, small, tired, but real. Truck roared. Tail lights dwindled. Tova stayed, perched on the hood of a snow-dusted pickup we'd borrowed for the short hop back to the Beaufort line. Her eyes danced under aurora glow. World's gonna change slow, she said, maybe slower than the ice melts. I pawed frozen gravel, felt the North Pole's faint spin under my pads. Slow beats never. I looked east, where first hints of dawn threatened violet. Case closed? She shook her head. Grin wicked. Clients keep calling. Icebreaker. A pod of narwhals found with microplastics plugging their spiracles. A drilling platform falsifying seabird mortality counts. You ready? I rumbled deep. The sound of bergs calving in distant fjords. Ready. We climbed into the truck. Engine coughing to life. Snow started to fall, fat flakes. Honest water returning to rightful form. Headlights carved twin tunnels through the whitening dark as we rolled toward the coast where ice branched like veins in need of new blood. Somewhere offshore, cubs would breathe easier, at least for one cycle. Somewhere on land, a CEO would practice apologies while lawyers taped his smile in place. Small victories, sure, but in Noir you collect shards of light and hope they add up to dawn. Radio crackled alive, searching for a station. Jazz crept through, an alto sax riff sliding over brushed drums. Cool as moonlit steel. Perfect. I tapped a claw in sync. Windshield framing endless white. The detective drove on, tailing the next scent of trouble curling over the horizon. Knowing the story never ends. Only fades to charcoal panels waiting for fresh ink. Fade to black. A single sax note hangs. Seagull lonesome. Then dissolves into the hush of falling snow.